Okay, let's make a start. So, thank you all for coming along to this talk. One of the last talks of the day, so I bet everyone's quite tired by now. My name's Stephen Haunts, and this talk is on hacking humans, and it's about social engineering techniques and how to protect against them. So this is a rough agenda of what we're going to look at in this talk. So we're going to talk about what social engineering is. We'll look at some famous cases. We'll go through some high-level social engineering techniques and a framework for social engineering. And then we'll talk a bit about how you can protect yourselves and your organisations from social engineering before we look at a few further resources. So I have to put the disclaimer in here. So social engineering generally leads to illegal activity. So obviously this talk isn't condoning that. The talk is ultimately about protection and prevention. But we're going to look at some of the techniques which help us protect. Because you don't want to be this guy ended up in prison for doing something bad. So social engineering is a huge subject, so treat this talk as the art of the impossible. I mean, you could literally spend your lifetime learning all about the psychology and all the different tips and tricks that these tricksters use. So this is kind of like an introductory framework to how a lot of this stuff's done. But first of all, let's start off with a bit of a story. So we have a guy called Keith who works in technical support for a large company, and he's sitting there through the middle of the night waiting for the phone to ring, but also waiting even more for his next tea break so he can go play pool with his friends. So he gets a call early in the morning from what sounds like a very panicked executive at the company. And the guy is on the phone, his name's Tom. He's like, Keith, I'm in a lot of shit. I've got this presentation I have to do for the investors tomorrow. It's worth $100 million. If I don't get this sorted, we're going to be in trouble, but I've locked myself out of my machine and I can't get back in and the password reset's not working. Can you help me? So Keith's sitting there thinking, oh my God, he's an executive at the company. This sounds quite severe. He goes, okay, yes, I'll help you. That's not a problem. So he tries to get the guy to go through the automated password reset, but the guy says it just doesn't work. And he's getting quite irate at this point. He's like, look, can you just reset the password for me on your end? I haven't got time to mess about. So Keith decides, okay, I best do it. So he resets the password for this particular user account that the guy wants reset and tells him what the password is. And the guy is very thankful. He's like, oh, thank you, you've just saved my career, because if I don't get this presentation done, then I'll be in a lot of trouble. So he puts the phone down, and Keith's sitting there very happy that he's done his good deed for the day. He's imagining himself high-fiving all his friends down the corridor. You know, he's literally saved one of the executives in the company. Meanwhile, our executive Tim, who's really a hacker, is logging in via those credentials and stealing lots of files. So clearly this is a very simple example, and sort of quite a trite example, but it just goes to show the point about how some of these attacks can happen within an organisation. So let's look at what social engineering is. So here's a good definition of it. It's the act of influencing someone to take an action that may not be in their best interest. And we'll come back to this definition a little bit later. So there's three general methodologies when it comes to social engineering attacks that we see out there. So the first one is phishing, which is kind of one we're all familiar with, where we get those dodgy emails from Nigerian princes and all those sorts of people trying to get us to click on links and give up details. Another one, which is quite common, is vishing, which is kind of a similar principle to phishing, but it's all done over the telephone. So has anyone had one of those call centres phone them up claiming that they're Microsoft and they've detected a virus on your machine? And you know, for $200 we can clear the virus for you. So that's a standard phishing attack. And the final one is impersonation. So you have people actually physically trying to impersonate other people to gain information, which is the one we're going to be focusing on later in the course. The talk, sorry. So I just wanted to go through a few statistics. These statistics are taken off of a website called socialengineering.org, and I think they're probably biased towards the US, but they're kind of more to illustrate a point. So 90% of email is spam. Certainly that's what my inbox looks like. And phishing represents about 77% of all social-based attacks. So phishing is, you know, the biggest type of social engineering scam that's out there, and it's one that affects most people. And clicking links accounted for 88% of all reported phishing incidents. So if we look at phishing, so 2.4 million customers were targeted for phone fraud in 2012 alone. And 2.3 million customers are targeted for phone fraud just in the first half of 2013. So this type of fraud is getting exponentially more serious. And the average loss for a targeted business, and again this is slanted to the US, was around £42,500, or dollars rather, per account. So impersonation, so a few stats again from socialengineering.org. So medical ID theft is on the rise due to websites impersonating medical providers, of which there was 1.8 million victims of this in 2013 alone. And it's a top place for ID theft is actually the workplace where you work. So if any information is going to get stolen about other people, it's going to come from the workplace. And 80% of these thefts involve disabling or bypassing controls. So, you know, these organisations may have very good network protection and firewalls and perimeter protection, but all it requires is someone within that organisation to start bypassing some of these controls, and then you have an issue. And the final one on there is 88% of reported stolen assets were personal data. So personal data is very valuable. It commands a premium price on the black market, especially if you've got medical information included with that personal data. So if we look at some of the types of social engineers that are out there, so you know you have your typical hackers, you've got your penetration testers, so people that are legally, you know, and ethically trying to help organisations protect themselves. Then you've got your typical spies, identity thieves. Disgruntled employees is a very big one for data theft within organisations. Recruiters, you know, they're very good at trying to manipulate you into going for interviews with jobs. That's part of their role, it's a sales role. Governments and also salespeople. So salespeople are there to try and influence you to maybe buy something which you don't really need to buy, but they're going to try and convince you. But can anyone think of another good example of a social engineer?
Your boss.
Your boss, yeah, that's a good one.
Pickup artists.
Pardon?
Pickup artists.
Pickup artists, yeah. Any more?
Politicians.
Politicians, yeah. Or my favourite one, children. Certainly my kids, they can wrap me around their little finger. So why do people do social engineering? The reason is because it consistently works. It's very easy to extract information out of people if you just know which buttons to press. And generally, as I said before, no matter how much you've invested in network protection and software and all that, people are still going to be the biggest vulnerability of any network, especially people within your organisation. And it also offers the path of least resistance. So, you know, you could spend a lot of effort trying to brute force crack passwords, etc., or you could spend some time manipulating someone to try and reveal secrets or passwords to you. So some common types of attacks. So people targeting customer service staff within organisations. This is typically done by phone, and they'll be trying to get email addresses of people within the company, for example. Delivery staff is another good one, so people posing as a delivery agent for, say, DHL or one of the other couriers. All they have to do is turn up in a brown boiler suit with a package under their arm and a rather convincing looking ID badge, and the chances are they're going to be let into your company. Lots of phone calls into the organisation targeting staff. I was targeted on this once. I used to work for a large internet bank in the UK called Egg, and we had a period of time where someone was going around phoning different people in the IT department, trying to ask us different questions to get effectively a logical idea of what our server architecture was, so that they could, I don't know what their eventual goal was. I mean, all of us were quite savvy and we'd had some level of training about this, so we all reported it. So for that guy it didn't work. But he wasn't just targeting one person, he was actually calling about 12 people fairly regularly around the company, posing to be another member of staff in the organisation. Because on site in the office we were working at, we had about 3,000 people, so it's very difficult to know everyone. And tech support, as we went through in our little story at the beginning, so tech support is a very good way of targeting someone. People in tech support, especially if they're very new in their career, are very eager to please and want to help, so they don't want to be seen as a barrier to helping out someone else in the company. Okay, so we look at a few sort of famous cases, and considering we're at a security conference, people are probably going to recognise quite a few of these. So the first one is a guy called Kevin Mitnick. Has everyone heard of him? Okay, so it was quite a high-profile case. So he was he spent quite a lot of time in prison, and he he did various attacks like DEC Computer Corporation, where he used to hack in and steal software from their systems. So he spent 12 months in prison for that one alone. And he also used to do things when he was younger, like trying to hack the LA bus system so he could get free rides on the bus network. So that's kind of how he started off, with sort of small scams like that. And then he sort of increasingly got bigger and bigger and bigger. So he spent quite a lot of time in prison. He was charged with 14 counts of fraud, 8 cases of unauthorised entry, as well as a lot more charges. But he's now a reformed character, so now he runs a very successful security consultancy where he goes in and teaches organisations how to protect themselves from people like him. He's written some really good books. I highly recommend reading these ones if you're into reading about this sort of subject. So The Art of Intrusion and The Art of Deception are really good textbooks. And then you've got Ghost in the Wire, which is kind of more like his biography. It's a fascinating read if you're interested in that. So the next one, which people have probably heard of, is a guy called Frank Abagnale. So he was a con man and confidence trickster and a cheque forger. And it's claimed that during his career he took on around 8 different personas or identities to carry out his crimes, including an airline pilot, a doctor and a lawyer. So the fact that he managed to trick his way into the cabin of an airplane and pose as an airline pilot is quite scary. So people have probably heard of him from this film with Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Hanks called Catch Me If You Can. Has anyone seen it? So it's a Hollywood dramatisation of his story. It's a pretty good film. And there's a bit from the film there where you've got Leonardo DiCaprio. He's there posing as an airline pilot. And the next example I want to look at, which people probably heard of, is Charles Ponzi, who popularised the Ponzi scheme. And this was a mail fraud scheme which used international reply coupons, which you would buy outside the US and then sell them for a profit inside the US. But then he realised to make more money, he needed to involve more people in the scheme. So he effectively formed what we know as the pyramid scheme. So as people join the scheme, the money flows down the pyramid. This was going quite well until the Boston newspaper started getting suspicious about his activities and started looking into his tax affairs. And then after that, it all started unravelling for him. Okay, so let's look at some social engineering techniques. So social engineering can be broadly broken down into 4 different areas in a framework. So we have information gathering, pretexting, elicitation, and then manipulation. So information gathering is as it sounds. It's about doing your research before you try and attack someone or do a social engineering attack against someone. So you're trying to find out as much information you can from as many resources as you can to build up a profile of that person and the company that you're trying to target. Many different ways of doing it. So a common way is dumpster diving, where you're literally going through people's trash, either at home or at their offices, because you'll be surprised how much valuable information is actually disposed of during the day at work. So if you have an old copy of a design document for some software that you're working on and a new version comes out which you print out, you might just throw the old version in the bin because it's not useful to you anymore. But to anyone else trying to find information out about your company, that's really valuable. So another thing as well about going through the bins, people can do it at your home as well if you leave your bin out, say the front of your house. And they could be looking for all sorts of things like, if you've got lots of alcohol bottles in there, then they'll probably know that you like a drink. So one of the ways they can try and engage with you is by getting you down the pub. Prescriptions as well, so if you're on particular medication, you might have thrown away prescription details or medicine bottles. Well, that gives people a lot of information about any particular illnesses you might have, which again can be used to blackmail you or used as a way of opening a conversation with you. Or even things like if you're, into vintage cars and you throw away some old magazines of vintage cars, it kind of gives people an interest or an idea of what your interests are, which can be used as a way of starting or initiating a conversation with you. Other techniques, what I'm sure we're all familiar with, is using social networking. So the amount of information that we all post daily on social networks is quite vast. And there's lots of people who still post quite a lot of public information on Facebook and don't necessarily lock it down to their friends only. I've warned a few of my friends about this before who are completely non-technical people, but you look at their Facebook accounts and everything's been posted as private, as public. Twitter, again, is very open. LinkedIn is very open. So if you're trying to find information out about people's career histories, or you're trying to link different people to different companies and form some kind of organisational charts, then LinkedIn is perfect for that. These days, things like Instagram as well. People seem to be very willing to share lots of information on Instagram. So you can go through their history and find out what they're like as a person, what their interests are, holidays they've been on, pictures of their children, you name it, it's all going to be on there. And then you've got the good old-fashioned Google or Bing searches. Always include Bing on there because you get some people here that like it. But just Googling information on people, you'd be surprised how much information you can find. So malware as well is a great way of doing information gathering. Did anyone see Niall's talk earlier? He was talking about some of the ways that you can use to inject malware onto people's machines to take screenshots or log keys that they're pressing. So with a lot of the toolkits that we use today in our community, like Kali Linux, all of those tools that we need to do this sort of stuff is on there, and it's all for free and fairly easy to use. So if you install a keylogger on someone's machine, you can capture their passwords as they're typing them in. If they've got sensitive information on their screen, you can take routine screenshots of what's on their screen, so you can get fragments of documents or bits of source code. All very good ways of gathering information, but obviously slightly more advanced than just going through someone's rubbish or Googling on the internet. Looking over someone's shoulder is a surprisingly good way of getting information. So before I left my last job, I used to commute about an hour and a half each day on the train to get to work. You'd be surprised that as you're getting into your seat and you just peer over someone's shoulder, you can see exactly what they're doing on their laptop, or if they're typing on their phone, it's really not that hard. Also as well, because I was a people manager at my last position, if I was ever writing their one-to-one notes or appraisal notes, I had a massive window which faced out into the office behind me, so I had to be very careful that when I was doing anything sensitive like that, I had my laptop or screens moved away from any windows where people could see, because it's a very good way of gathering information. Of course, you could go to an extreme and start using one of these. And these do exist. They're called privacy scarfs. I've never seen anyone actually use one, but I did look it up online and you can buy them. Okay, so that's information gathering. So that's all about trying to find information out about the people or the companies that you're trying to target. Because that information then leads in to the next phase, which is pretexting. And pretexting is the practice of presenting oneself as someone else in order to obtain private information. So effectively it's about acting. You're taking on someone else's persona to try and buy someone's trust because you're trying to get information out of them. And it's more than just creating a simple lie to get information from someone. You literally are taking on an entire persona. And this takes quite a lot of time and practice to do, so not everyone's going to be able to do it. It kind of depends on what your acting and lying and deceit skills are like. So a few principles around pretexting. So you need to do a lot of planning and research, and that's going to lead to more success. So the more forward planning and effort you put into this, the more successful you're likely to be. If you just go straight in and try and trick someone, the chances are you're going to fail. Shared interests make success more likely. So like I was saying before, if you find information in their bins or online about particular interests they've got and you actually share those interests, it's going to make you more convincing. So if you find out they're a Manchester United fan and you are as well, then you've got a whole wealth of information that you can use just to chat with them about, just to get them to be confident in you. So as I said before, good acting definitely helps. If you go in there and you start saying lots of hammy, really bad lines, or you look really nervous and fidgety, then you're not going to come across as very convincing. But also a key thing is keeping it simple. So you don't want to come up with too much of an elaborate pretext or persona, because the chances are you're not going to be able to keep that going for too long. And also as well, you want to use information when you're talking to these people that doesn't require any verification. So if you say something that's maybe controversial and they then go and feel they have to look it up or query what you've said, then that can sometimes lead to you being found out. So pretexting takes a lot of planning. So first of all, you need to write down what it is you aim to achieve. And you need to plan for different reactions that stray from the happy path as well. So you may have a vision in your mind of going in and talking to someone, and you know exactly what your goal is, and you plot out that kind of successful path to get in there. But what happens if they say something you wasn't expecting, or you think you've got some information on them, but actually it's wrong, and they say something else? How are you going to react to that? Are you just going to stand there and like go and just look confused, or have you actually sort of planned out different scenarios? And also, when we said about keeping it simple, we'll just go in and being friendly be enough. Do you need to go to the effort of putting on a large act? Some people, you know, if you're just friendly and nice to them, and you just strike up an instant rapport with them, over time you'll be able to get them to reveal lots of information. So I've got another definition of social engineering here. So it's the clever manipulation of the natural human tendency to trust. And trust is the kind of the big word there. So you are trying to build up a relationship with someone with the intent of them being able to trust you. Now this takes a lot of time, it's not instant. So you're not going to walk up to someone in a pub, talk to them for 5 minutes and then get what it is you want out of them. The chances are you'll be talking to them for days, weeks or even months before you actually go in for the kill, as it was. Okay, so the next stage is elicitation. So elicitation is the act of getting information without directly asking for it. So if I go up to you and say, what's your password? That's not going to end very well, is it? So elicitation is about getting them to reveal information, but you don't directly have to go in and ask for it. You gradually coerce it out of them. And generally this is all about exploiting human nature. So most people want to be polite, most people want to be helpful. And people also want to appear well informed. So if you're targeting more junior members of staff at an organisation and you're pretending to be, say, a higher up manager in this huge corporation, people want to appear well informed. They don't want to come across as if they don't know what they're talking about. So their way of appearing to be well informed will be to tell you lots of information. People also want to be appreciated. So, you know, if you're going in there and you're polite, you know, your pleases and thank yous, that also helps people trust you and also be more willing to give out information. And generally, a human trait is that people that are honest don't like to withhold information or lie. So not everyone is a liar. You know, people do generally want to be nice and won't necessarily want to withhold information. So elicitation is largely about understanding how to communicate with people. And to do this, this comes with experience of working with people, talking with people, and it's also about learning how to adapt your communications to fit a situation. So as I said before, you may plan for a happy path scenario of how you try and get some information out of someone, but the chances are something's going to happen that you're not going to have expected. So if you're expecting to have a quiet two-way chat with someone and it's in a bar, but then two of their friends suddenly turn up, how are you going to adapt your situation to cater for that? And as we've already said, you don't want to just go straight in for the kill to get the information from people. You want to build up a bond with your target, and this may take a long time. It could be weeks, it could be months, or maybe even longer, depending on what or who it is you're trying to get information from. And staying in character of your pretext is very important. So imagine, you know, your pretext is that you're, say, a single person and you're talking to someone else, and then suddenly one day you forget to take your wedding ring off before you go and talk to the person. You know, that's going to blow your cover effectively if they notice that you've got a wedding ring on. And also understanding effective use of questioning techniques. So when we talk about questioning techniques, we've got 4 here. So we have neutral, open, closed and leading questions. So a neutral question is quite a general question. It doesn't really direct the user or the person on how to answer the question. So there's no leading or directing or coercing. So if I was to say to you, how do you like the weather today? That's kind of quite broad. You can answer that in many different ways. Oh, I like the fact that it's snowing. I really love the fact that the pavements are icy and I fell over 10 times on the way to the conference centre. You know, you can give a multitude of answers to it. So an open-ended question encourages a full, meaningful answer using the subject's own knowledge and feelings. So an example here is, you know, tell me about the relationship with your father. Or how do you feel about the election candidates? Again, they're still very open questions. There's lots of scope for people to give you long, rambling answers. But on the flip side to that, you have closed questions. And these help give you control of a conversation and allow you to lead where that conversation is going to go. So, for example, if you say, do you get on with your father? You know, yes, I do. No, I don't. It's very closed. There's not really that many ways you can answer it. Or who are you going to vote for? You know, you're going to vote for candidate A or candidate B. And the final one is a leading question. So this is where you're trying to steer someone down a particular path or train of thought. So as an example, we've got here, do you have any problems with your boss? Well, I've highlighted two words there, problems and boss. You're kind of leading them to start thinking, well, do I have a problem with my boss? Well, yeah, maybe I do. I really hate that thing where he slaps me on the back where I've done something nice. So it's kind of leading someone in a certain direction. Well, the other example there is how fast was the red car going when it smashed into the blue car? It's leading you to think that it was the red car that was going fast and it smashed into the blue car. That may not have been the case. It may have been the other way around. It might have been the blue car that hit the red car first. So questioning, you generally want to think of it as like a funnel. So you might start off with neutral, open questions. So you're trying to build a rapport. So you're just having a conversation with someone. You're not trying to get too specific in what you're talking about. Then gradually you go down into sort of more open questions, and then as you start narrowing down to the target, you get more closed. So you're trying to get more definite answer from them. And then as a last resort, you might go to a more directed question where you're very, very explicit about what you're asking for, but you're giving them more scope to answer, instead of it being closed. So if we look back then, so pretexting, we've talked about, is taking on a persona, and elicitation is using that persona to extract the information. So the pretext is you acting, pretending to be someone else, and then the act of elicitation is you then using that persona to try and draw that information out of someone. So the next bit on that framework was manipulation. So I just want to define what the two mean. So influencing is influencing someone to change their mind in a way that is good for them. So if you're out drinking with your friends and you think your friend has had too many drinks and you suggest that he shouldn't have any more, you're trying to influence him because it's good for him. Manipulation, on the other hand, is influencing someone to make a change or to change their mind in a way that is not good for them. Yeah, stay and have another beer, yeah. So influencing is about it being a win-win situation between two people, whereas manipulation is win-lose. So if I'm trying to manipulate someone to do something that's not in their best interest, it's a win for me, but it's a lose for them. Now manipulation is generally bad, you know. As social creatures, we don't really want to be manipulating people, but for social engineering, manipulation is what it's all about. So if we go back to our original definition from earlier, so it's the act of influencing someone to take an action that may not be in their best interest. So really what we're talking about is the act of manipulation. And there's lots and lots and lots of manipulation techniques. There's huge books written on the subject, but we're going to talk about a few sort of common manipulation techniques. So first one is using fear, or the fear and relief technique. So this is a technique where you offer up a fearful situation to start with, but then you immediately offer a relief to try and build up someone's trust. So as an example here, we've got, hi, this is tech support. We detected a virus on your machine and it could affect all of your work files. That's the fear. So the person on the phone is probably thinking, oh shit, I'm going to lose all my work. But don't worry, we can install an anti-malware tool. You just need to give us your password so we can remote log on and install the tool, and then the problem will be gone in a few minutes. So that's the relief. So you do immediate fear, offer up relief straight away, and that person will be so shocked at that point that they're just going to give you what you want to get the job done to make you go away. So using guilt is another manipulation technique. So doing someone a favour and then using it against them. So when you're doing your information gathering and going through your planning for your pretext, you might find out that actually this person's in debt. You know, they might owe 5,000 euros on their credit card and they're struggling to pay it off because you've seen their credit card statements in the bin. So, you know, one thing you could do is, as you befriend them over time, you could offer to help them with their debt. If you do that, then you've got something over them because you've helped them out, and you can use that as a guilt technique later on. You know, an example there. So I need you to copy these files for me. You owe me a favour after I kept, you know, X secret for you. I mean, it could be that you found out that the person you're targeting is having an affair on their partner, and you found that information out. And you can also use that as a guilt technique, because, you know, they're not going to want you to tell their partner, so they'll probably be more complicit in helping you. The next one is called the foot in the door technique. It's used a lot by salesmen. So asking the victim to do a very small request first, and then once they comply, follow on with the real request. So one pretty good one is, you know, sometimes when you get homeless people on the street, they'll stop you and they'll ask you the time first. And you stop there, you look at your watch, oh, it's 4:30. So you've done a simple request for you first, and immediately they offer up, you know, have you got any change? It's used by salesmen. You know, they'll knock on your door, they'll start talking to you, they'll ask you how the weather is. You know, they'll ask you several positive questions and get you to response. And then once they've done that, they're going to be in a position where they're going to start trying to sell you something. And that's called the foot in the door technique. So that's a very high level sort of look at the general framework for social engineering. As I say, it's one of those subjects that you could probably spend your entire life learning, because it's all about psychology and how humans interact. But generally, you break it down into those 4 stages. So the information gathering, building up the pretext, which is your persona that you're going to take on. Elicitation is how you're going to draw the information out of someone using that persona. And you're going to use manipulation and influencing techniques to do that. So what can we do about it as individuals and as companies? And actually protecting yourself from this stuff isn't as hard as what you might think. A lot of it is good common sense. So if we look at some of the personal mitigation techniques. So common targets might be junior staff, contractors, admin staff or support staff. A lot of these people are targeted because they're going to be probably more vulnerable in an organisation. So junior staff, as we said before, they're there eager to learn, eager to help. Contractors aren't necessarily going to have the same vested or emotional interest in the company as what a full-time member of staff might be, so that might be a good type of person to go for. Administrator staff, you know, sort of lower paid junior admin staff, and people in tech support, like our story at the beginning. So a good thing to always do is, if anyone ever enters the building, so like the delivery man that we was talking about before, is always ask for ID and try and verify their ID. And also you want to watch for out of character questions. So if someone starts giving you some convoluted backstory before they ask you another question, that's normally a sign that they're trying to prepare you for another request. So if someone goes in with lots of backstory, then that could be a marker that you want to look out for. Don't let guests roam free around the building. I mean, that one sounds really obvious, but you'd be surprised how many companies do it. So even the last company I was at, delivery man would turn up and the receptionist would just say to, you know, drop the parcel off over there. You know, all it takes is a delivery man to walk around the building, enter a server room. That could be bad, or he could walk in, drop in USB keys on the floor, which have malware installed on them. So never let them roam free. Don't plug in USB thumb drives that you leave lying around. It's surprising how many people still do this, especially if someone drops a 256 gigabyte thumb drive on the floor. I mean, they're reasonably expensive. If someone's going to see it on the floor, they're going to be quite happy with their find. You know, all it takes is for them to plug it in on a corporate network that hasn't got USB ports disabled on the machines, and then you can have all sorts of malware, keyloggers, screenshotters, all installed on the system. Being aware of what you were saying. So if you are, you know, out of the company at a conference like this, or in a bar or in a restaurant, just be conscious of what you're talking about with who you're with, because you never know who's going to be sitting around you. You know, you should never really discuss anything that's confidential about your organisation or anything that's commercially sensitive when you're outside the company, because anyone could be listening, and they could be deliberately listening as well, because they've already targeted you. So sometimes they might not even have to use their persona to elicit information out of you. If you're just being loose-lipped in a bar, then you're just going to give that information up anyway. Shredding documents. So this goes for at home and in the office. So bank statements, prescription details, anything that's got your name and address on it, financial documents, you should shred them all before you bin them. Any utility bills, because those seemingly useless bits of information to you are actually very useful to someone else, so don't just throw them in the bin. Again, going back to USB thumb drives, you shouldn't really store commercially sensitive information on thumb drives. Obviously, it's better if you've got ones that have got AES encryption on them, that's better, but thumb drives are very easy to lose. You can lose your keys very easily, or they can fall out of your pocket. Use drive encryption on your laptop or computers. They all come with it by standard these days, so BitLocker on Windows, and you've got the Fold Vault on Apple Mac devices. So make sure you have it configured and running, and your drive's being encrypted. Again, it's something that's very easy to set up, but some people don't do it. And if you lose your machine or it gets stolen, you don't want people to be able to read the contents of the hard drive. And again, being aware of who's looking over your shoulder. So if you're on a train travelling to work and you've got your laptop out and you're just trying to get some work done on the hour while you're on the train, just be aware of who's looking over your shoulder. Or if you're sitting next to a window and it's dark outside, your screen's going to be reflecting off of that window. So if someone's sitting on a seat behind you to the left, they can probably see what's happening on your screen just by the reflection on the window. Not that I've ever looked at anyone's screen on the train from the window. And the other one is educating yourself. So high level talks like this, some of the books that I'm talking about, I'll show you at the end of the course, at the end of the talk, and just general courses that you can get online. So educating yourself and encouraging your company to run similar training to this is very beneficial. So now go on to more sort of corporate mitigation techniques. So these might be things that you have direct influence of at your company, or they might not, but you could at least go and suggest them to people in your organisation. So identifying what information assets are most valuable and then colour coding them accordingly. So if you have documents on your system or on SharePoint or wherever you store your documents, you might have some colour codings on the front cover. So common ones are green for OK to release. Amber might be release only but with authorization, so you need to get permission of a line manager before you email it to anyone. And then red will just be confidential, do not release. But having a simple colour-coded system makes it easy to know at a glance what you can or can't do with that document. So writing a corporate security policy or a set of policy documents. So these are generally quite important, but I also know through experience that when companies write these, people don't read them. Has anyone ever read their corporate security policy documents at work? One person? Two? Generally people don't read them because they're a bit long and boring, but they are important to have in place because it gives the company guidance and leverage on what they can do if any of those policies are broken. If you haven't got one in your company, or it's a fairly small company, you can go to this website here at sans.org, and they have a load of template documents that you can use. So it might not be completely relevant for everything that your company does, but it's a good starting point. If you do put these documents in place, as I said, people aren't necessarily going to read them, so you want to get your companies to put training in place as well. So you actually have an instructor-led session where, at a fairly highish level or medium level, someone in the company will go through what's in those documents, and then you get someone to sign off that they've taken that course at the end. Because then the company should be able to use those documents as a way of, I think punish is the right word, but there needs to be some kind of comeback. So if someone does break some of the policy documents, they need to be held to account for it. This one's a big one, which doesn't always happen, but should, is keeping software updated and patched. So as well as using social engineering techniques, people are going to be trying to install malware and taking advantage of different vulnerabilities in different software. So keeping your systems patched and up to date is very important. And this one follows on from what we were talking about shredding, but if you're in a larger organisation, you should maybe set up a document shredding service where you have one of those third-party companies install, the big document bins in your company, and then they turn up with a van and they all shred them on site in bulk. Very useful to have. Pretty much all the large companies I've worked at have all had confidential waste disposal systems or document disposal systems for getting rid of anything important, especially when I worked in healthcare, because there was quite a lot of sensitive information that we had access to, which was printed out. Never assume your company is too small to be a target. Another thing that people do is they think, my 15-person company, who's going to target us? They're going to be going after the big banks or the big companies. Not necessarily. A smaller company might be easier for them to get information on. And, someone could be working on behalf of a larger competitor who's trying to find out what it is exactly that your company's doing. So they might try and get information about the products you're building, and then they'll sell it back to a larger competitor. Okay, so let's go through a quick summary of what we've gone through here. So social engineering is the act of influencing someone to take on an action that may not be in their best interest. You can get lots of different types of people doing social engineering. So penetration testers are kind of the genuine ethical type who will do this against companies to test their systems and staff. But you can have lots of people that do this for bad, nefarious reasons, including children, or mine anyway. People do social engineering because it consistently works, and the people in an organisation are the biggest threat to any network. So it doesn't matter how much you spend on hardware and software to protect your systems. All it takes is one person not doing what they're supposed to be doing or giving out information, and then your system's compromised. And also it's generally a path of least resistance. So if someone's trying to get passwords, they could go try and do an internal hack and try and get the password file from your database or the password tables and brute force it, or they could just try and coerce someone into revealing their password. So the techniques we looked at, it was a 4-stage process. So information gathering is all about gathering information about the company and the people that you're trying to target. So you can use anything from going through people's rubbish through to looking on social networks and Googling them. You'd be surprised how much information you can get. I mean, has anyone ever Googled themselves to find out what they can find? Yeah, and did you find quite a lot of information that you wasn't expecting? No? Okay. So pretexting is the next stage, and this is all about taking on a persona. So it's all about acting. You're trying to take on a persona to fool someone into thinking that you're someone else. And then using that persona, you'll use elicitation and different questioning techniques to try and draw that information out of someone. So you're not going to go in and directly ask them what their password is or what the product is they're working on, because that'll make them suspicious. But over time, if you build up a rapport with them, so you go out drinking with them, you might even socialise by playing football or taking up sports with them, then you just do that for several months before you even think of asking about any information. It builds up rapport and it builds up trust. And off the back of that, we looked at some manipulation techniques and looked at the differences between influencing, which is a win-win scenario, and manipulation, which is a win-lose scenario. So one person benefits while the other person loses. And then finally, we looked at some personal and corporate mitigation techniques. So the thing you probably would have drawn from that is all those techniques are actually very simple. They're straightforward, fairly common sense. But it's surprising how many people and companies don't do some of those things, like being aware of what you're saying when you're out and about, so at conferences or in bars. Pardon? Taxis, yeah, that'd be a good one for that earlier slide, actually, taxi drivers, because they're very talkative. I mean, we got an Uber last night going back to the hotel, and he was probably the chattiest taxi driver I've spoken to in a while.
Yeah, and you talk to your colleagues in a taxi from a conference or a meeting.
Yeah, absolutely. So just idle chit-chat in the back of the taxi, definitely. Okay, so a few resources that you can use, which are quite good. I've got a course on Pluralsight, which I did with a good friend Lars Klint. He's kind of covers a lot of the information that we've talked about today, if you ever wanted to go back and refresh yourself. The books by Kevin Mitnick, I highly recommend reading them. I think every security professional or anyone interested in software development should read his books. They are absolutely fascinating. This book here, called Social Engineering, The Art of Human Hacking, is a massive book. It's probably a good 1,000 or so pages, but it's kind of one of the definitive textbooks in this field. You know, every field has its definitive textbook, and for social engineering, this is it. So if you wanted to go into a lot more detail, it follows a rough guide of what we talked today, but it goes into loads more detail, loads more techniques. And one thing we didn't have time to cover on today is about body language. because body language is a very good technique for trying to do a pretext, and being able to read body language, seeing how people are reacting to your questions. This guy here called Joe Navarro, he's an ex-FBI field agent who was an expert in reading body language when it came to interrogating people. So this book talks about lots of different techniques. So if someone's sitting at a desk and you're talking to them and they're steepling their hands, that's normally a sign of confidence. If you're rubbing your legs, that's a sign that you're nervous. If your legs and feet are pointing towards the door, it means you're uncomfortable. It means you want to make a quick escape. Those are just sort of 3 examples, and he goes through a whole range of different techniques. He also talks about how just by reading someone's body language from watching videos back, they managed to convict a murderer that they were struggling to convict. So that's it. Thank you very much. It's the end of the conference. I hope everyone's had a good NDC security. So my name's Stephen Haunts. I do lots of training, generally around cryptography and agile software development. And I'm also an author for Pluralsight, so I've done 12 courses for Pluralsight now. And if you go to many conferences, you'll frequently see me on the speaking gigs. I've been to NDC Oslo a few times, NDC London, Sydney, Techorama, SDD, lots of events like that. So you can quite often find me hanging out at these conferences. And I also run a user group in the UK, so if anyone's ever near Nottingham or Derby in the UK on the last Thursday of every month, then feel free to come to my user group. It's a .NET software development group. It's good fun and it's free. So thank you very much. Thanks for coming.